thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's an exciting night tonight to hear from Amy. I wanted to give her a brief introduction before she gets started. Amy has a strong background in drawing. She got her MFA in drawing from CSU, and she finds that her drawing is a very integral part to her installations that she does. Amy has a vast portfolio and experience in the world of art and art instruction. She has exhibited installation, sculpture, and drawing nationally and internationally. Her recent site-related works have been installed at Earthworks, the Feed and Grain, the Soap Factory in Minneapolis, and the Saugatuck Center for the Arts in Michigan. Her residency awards include the Barstow Artist in Residence at Oxbow, and Art 342. Her instruction has been across the world, from Italy to Africa, New York to Michigan, to Chicago, and finally here in Chicago, here in Colorado, where she's both an art educator and artist. So please help me welcome Amy.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Angela. What I wanted to do tonight was present you with some images and some video interviews with some installation artists. This isn't really intended to be a lecture, but more of a conversation, because a lot of this has come out of my personal research in installation art and how it is not clearly defined yet, and not really determined as a singular genre of art or classification of art. Oftentimes when we talk about installation art in contemporary art, we group it in with performance and participatory art, interventionist art. And so I'm interested in the language that's used in how we talk about it and what is going to happen with it, if anything. I wonder if installation art can be one thing, because I'm of the mindset that it can't be everything. And so I want to share with you some of the information that I gathered even during my thesis at CSU, where I was defending the idea of drawing as being three-dimensional and not just sculpture, but also installation. So this is one of my first investigations in how to figure out what installation art is and how it can be classified and what are the clarifications within it. Oftentimes, when we look at the origins of installation art, we go back to constructionist work that was done by Vladimir Tatlin, who was coming out of the corner, and he was also, along with Blazitsky, working with this idea of taking painting and having it come off the wall and becoming architecture. Then there was Kurt Schwitters, who basically turned his house into an installation. And so he lived with the installation. And that can be seen in other artists like Nikki St. Paul, where there are these obscure living environments that have been designed and become this transformation of space that we live in. Jumping from Schwitters, there's Marcel Duchamp, did his famous 16 Miles of String, which was essentially an intervention in a surrealist show. And what happened was he intended to use 16 miles of string. And during the process of installing this, 14 miles of it apparently caught fire. And when he was finished working with it, he really only used 1 mile. And then, as an environment, no one was allowed to go in, except a bunch of children in helmets and sports gear got to go in and just wreak havoc. So this is the sort of interventionist art that Duchamp was involved with. So these are the sorts of works that happened before the 60s, where there was essentially a movement to go from the gallery and minimalist sculpture to Earthworks. And I would say, and anybody can argue with me, okay? Like this is intended to be a conversation, and if you want to ask questions or make comments, please do. But I believe that at this point we still accept Earthworks or land art as being a separate type of artwork. And it also is expressed in the way of ephemeral art that happens in other earthworks, like artists like Andy Goldsworthy, who works with that today. So there's the jetty, and then Alice Aycock was making some work on the other side of the United States, in Pennsylvania. And these were works that, if I can just go back, these are works that I consider to be a part of installation art that is about site, time, and material, or an aesthetic vocabulary. The aesthetic vocabulary would be using those materials that are found on location. The site is the actual location. And the time, in this sense, I believe to be the time that the piece exists and how it changes through time and how it changes through the way that the land moves and the weather impacts it. Which is apparent in the state that the spiral jetty is in. Nancy Holt's sun tunnels in Utah. And these are interesting because I don't necessarily believe that these concrete tubes are intended to be of the land, but they're contradictory toward the land. And yet they still fit within the environment. And they become an installation, but it's more of a permanent installation in a sense. Which is an interesting thing to think. Like, I'm going to jump around because this is a big idea too. So this is an interesting thing because right now in contemporary art collections, what is installation art if it's supposed to be a temporary art piece, and then it's bought by a contemporary collector and permanently installed in their collection? How does that affect how we categorize installation art? I don't know if you guys know who Christo and Jean Claude are. Yeah? Come on. Like, seriously. Lives here now. But you know, this is definitely, they were always committed to a particular material within their types of installations and their temporary pieces. And that's basically rooted in the fabric that they used. And then Walter de Maria is using a natural material, lightning, where you can actually go there, you can reserve a night, and hope that there's a storm.
How's that different from photography that how can you call that installation?
Well, he installed the lightning rods, essentially. And so the lightning rods track the lightning, and it becomes... And then there's Jim Terrell, who's known for a lot of different types of work, and his ongoing project of the crater, which who knows what's going to happen. So as I mentioned, I believe that Andy Goldsworthy fits within these earthworks in a more contemporary sense, where he's using the material that's available, it's temporary work, and like a lot of installation, it only exists at a certain point within documentation. Meanwhile, Gordon Nana Clark was working with a similar type of installation art, but in an urban environment, not in a more landscape-based earth environment as these other artists that I've shown you. And he worked in Barcelona, Spain, Paris, New York, working with buildings, altering them, and working with this sort of anarchy for architecture. I find his work to be particularly interesting because he has this parallel practice where a lot of his work was documented and then altered. The documentation was altered. So he created these other pieces through the documentation. So you can see there's a photograph. Well, both of these are photographs, but he's altered the photograph on the left side. So then there's another category of installation art, which I consider to be just site and material with aesthetic vocabulary, because it's not necessarily related to the time. And the site being just a space where that material is, and it's a space that could be considered as installation that is location specific or site related and not necessarily site specific. So Gago was working in 1969 and the 70s and through the early 80s in some work where she was making drawings that came off the wall into space with wire and line. Similarly, Phoebe Washburn has a vocabulary that is in ready-made materials, plant life, wood, cardboard, and she creates these installations that fit within a space. So what is installation? I believe it is not just sculpture, and it is not just an experience, but it has to be a type of artwork that is completed by the experience of the viewer. And this becomes a very fine line between what installation art is and what sculpture is. And I'm not saying that we need to determine what that line is or whether something is sculpture or whether something is installation art, but it would be interesting to have that discussion about what characterizes installation art and what characterizes just sculpture. Well, not just sculpture, it's not like sculpture is the redheaded stepchild. Jessica Stockholder started doing work like this in graduate school, just in her own environment, and then became very interested in ready-made materials, a lot of plastics, a lot of color, and responds to a space, but this isn't necessarily something that has to stay within that particular space. Which is why I continue to argue that this is more location-specific or site-related versus something that's conceptually connected with the actual space, as I believe the truest sense of installation art can be. You guys aren't asking any questions?
Okay. And you may answer, I mean, you may be too soon here, but when you say completed by the experience of the viewer, that's installation. How are you defining experience? Because I would say all art is completed by the experience of the viewer. Sculpture certainly is, and that's where Duchamp was resting. And so I'm thinking your term experience is different, that there's something else that you're thinking about the definition of experience.
The spatial, more experiencing.
Yeah, I'm
thinking
that the experience is beyond just sharing the space to get it to the actual sculpture. And I'm going to get to that.
Okay, that's okay.
It seems like photography is an integral part, drawing and photography of the, you had found site and material, but the photography records, like in Andy Goldsworthy's case, records his pieces, otherwise nobody would see him with him. And in the case of a lot of things like that, you have no clue about an installation piece without it being recorded.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I know Cousteau likes his drawings, you know, and turns them into mixed media.
I guess that's why I look at sculpture versus installation is the documentation. It has to be there with installation.
Oh, yes, definitely.
That's what
Because it can't be fully experienced unless you are there in person. And that has to do with smell, it has to do with what it sounds like, it has to do with the other people that are interacting in the space. Just one second. I would say that one of the people who I believe to be the best at documenting their work as far as installation is Ann Hamilton. I mean, she has the documentation in photography. She is so good at describing her work in writing, and then she also has a ton of video that's all available on her website. It gives you as full a picture as you possibly can get without being there. But there's still that, that step ahead where you have to have been there.
Well,
I'll
that's
just
how they make
skip
their
ahead.
money. That's one of the good ways to make profit from installation art. It's really difficult to get much profit from some installation art, but by selling your drawings, your photographs, your things, in the book.
Or by, creating documentation, like Christo creates, his art, all these extra pieces, which are documentation on art.
I think that was kind of related to my question. Do you consider the documentation of the installation a parallel art form?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Sometimes I believe that installation art is supposed to be just that, and then there's the documentation.
Just as a historical artifact?
Yes, as a document, yeah. But then what Christo is doing with his drawings is that I see that as an extended practice, because it's not a true documentation of the work. It's using some of it, but it's not like an actual true documentation is what you would see. Sarah Z makes these beautiful catalogs of her work, which I think really highlight how her work can be seen in sections, how she has very minimal parts to her work, and then also has these larger site-related documents of what her work looks like in a space. I think if we're talking about making money as an artist, Sarah Z just recently had this piece that was commissioned by the City of New York on the High Line, where she made a site-related sculpture that was functional and environmental in the sense that these are birdhouses and feeding stations to attract birds to this upper level above the city natural environment that people are using at this point. Just going a little bit further with talking about materials that are used by installation artists and how those materials are put within a space. Tara Donovan is a great example of how to use just a regular material and have it be an experience, have it be something that is of a larger scale. These are styrofoam cups that she creates clouds and spaces. She also does these walls of drinking straws. And so there's a real transformation of that material that I believe is an experience in and of itself. So to have an immersive experience and have something that is a little bit more that completed experience that makes it more installation art-like. We look at Ernesto Neto's work, and he does these huge nets that hang from the ceiling, so not only are you having an experience of scale, but he fills these nets with spices. And so you're having this very sensual experience within the space, smelling like turmeric and cardamom and cumin and all of these different spices. How does that get recorded in documentation?
That's probably just a small.
I've seen some of Olafur Eliasson's work. You can smell it, but really, I haven't seen a lot. And I think there's a struggle. There's a struggle in installation art about how tempered it's going to be. And,
Well, if you ever walk into a sweaty shop, really like paycheck, so it's probably kind of just use it. No, not yet. That's crazy.
it's a risky thing with the art. The smell of burlap and the scale of these pieces that Magdalena Abramovich did is another experience that I would say is a total experience. Olafur Eliasson is an installation artist who works a lot with visual perception. And so we can look at this particular documentation of this piece that he did where this room appears to be all yellow because of the fluorescent light. But if you're actually in the room and you're in this yellow fluorescent light, everything looks like it's black and white. So he's taking that spectrum and completely changing it for the viewer, and it's completely impossible to record. I think just having a fantastical experience, like what Saigo Chang does with his work that has taxidermy animals in it, and to have it scale, and to just be in the presence of this type of work can be a total experience as well. Has anybody ever seen this piece in person?
It's in Boston, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
What's it like?
Awesome.
But it's a shed that was blown apart. by
Yeah,
Natalie.
she blew it up.
Yeah. And then reassembled it, and there's this wonderful quality of shadow about it. And it doesn't move, does it? No. But there's this other piece here, and this piece actually moves within the space. And so you have this pattern that's moving over all of the people who are occupying the space with this sculpture that's lit. Anish Kapoor, who's really well known for the beam, or rather the cloud in Chicago, has been doing these really very large pieces in very large museums where you can't even enter the room anymore. You're only looking at a portion of it. And it's interesting to me to experience a space with a sculpture where you can't see the entire sculpture anymore. And it becomes so large. And then you become a part of the sculpture inside of it. I think just thinking about how there's a repeated element within a space can also be an experience, and Yayoi Kusama's work is very experiential, especially if you understand that she lives in a mental institution by choice, and she has this, this sort of experience that she repeats over and over and over again within her artwork. She's also well known for the mirror rooms that she's done.
Does she have like pink hair, like in?
She does, yeah.
I love that.
So this idea of a total installation was initially explored by Ilya and Emilia Kabakov, and he essentially wrote a manifesto about the total installation and how it can be completely immersive. And by doing this, he made a 10-room installation piece that was about the man who flew into space from his apartment. And so in this particular room, there's a catapult device. I'm not sure if you can see that very clearly. And it's like the after effect. It's like you're arriving after everything happened. And this piece is a great example of how it was originally built in 1968, and then it's been rebuilt and reinstalled in all of these different places. So if it is a total installation, it's not necessarily site-specific, but he's making these site-specific to the installation. So there's this back and forth that I find really interesting, because how do we then determine what installation art is and what it isn't? Ai Weiwei made this piece after the earthquakes, and these are all backpacks, children's backpacks, placed on the exterior of the school to commemorate the children who died in those earthquakes because of the shoddy construction of the schools.
You know what it says?
It says she lived happily for all of her 8 years
For
or something.
7, yeah, I think she lived happily on this earth for 7 years.
Yes.
That way.
So here she is. Here's Yang Kasama, and one of her mirror situation. And I just wanted to do this screenshot of an image search of her because, like, her life is an installation. Like, she is living it. She is living the whole thing. And I believe this piece was purchased by the Broad Foundation, and this is permanently installed in their new museum in LA. So as far as total installation, I would say that Amy Hamilton really takes the cake here because she is working with particular sites and ideas that are connected to those sites. And so she did this piece in a garment factory, right? A fabric situation. And she hung these scrims of fabric, and there's this sewn and drawn line that is projected around these screens. And so you have, this is an abandoned factory, you have this sense of this ghost-like presence, and this becomes a complete immersion within the space. Like you feel the emptiness, but you're also a part of it, and you're having this experience of seeing this image that's being shown over the walls, and this nostalgia, and I could go on and on and on, or not. So, another piece that she did was in this Jeffersonian building. This was for, why am I blanking? Anyway, there's a sound part of this particular piece where somebody is whispering, and then this powdered pigment falls over the walls that are covered in braille, and it's this piece that is complete. You are completely immersed within the space. You're immersed in this powerful pigment and this voice that's happening throughout the space, and then this tactile application to the wall where the braille is only highlighted by the pigment that's being spread over it. This is a more recent work that she did in Armory, where it's kind of like Abby's, where people are lying underneath it and they're having that experience all together in this enormous building. And she has so many aspects that are happening within these installations of sound, performance. Sometimes in pieces she has peacocks. Sometimes, there are all these different levels of involvement and, sensory sort of stimulation that the viewer has when they're in her work. So, that said, I wanted to show you some interviews with Amy Hamilton and James Terrell, and perhaps maybe have a discussion These interviews come from an Art 21 episode on spirituality. Unless anybody has anything to say right now. I know I'm going really fast.
This is really exciting.
Okay. So,
one connection for me between the thread of sewing and the line of that thread and the thread of writing. I certainly grew up doing a lot of handwork, needlework, sewing, knitting, embroidery, all of those traditional textile arts. I think the process is just really satisfying, but the metaphors that cloth offer up are really extraordinarily beautiful because every piece of cloth that we wear is made up of all these individual threads, whatever they're weaved, and that each one of those is still something that you can see. And the whole cloth means each one of those. And so it's a social metaphor to me, it's actually very beautiful. The very first piece I did when I was in graduate school, I had taken a just kind of generic clothing and covered it in toothpaste so that the whole skin of cloth became like a hide. It looked like a porcupine. I know for me, that relationship between the thread and the written line and the drawn line is about a really very fundamental act of making. That the relationship of the line that makes something is related to how we make things with language. I think that I'm always trying to work with words as materials the same way I work with other kinds of materials. The Project Monument, which is a title that comes from a Wallace Stevens poem, that flat two-dimensional plane of the page is made into a three-dimensional body because each line is lifted out of the book as if it is a thread. And that thread of text is run through the hands, it's tactile, it's touched, and then it creates a ball, which is the body of the page. So there are all these places I see that there's this constant tie of thread as line and line as line of writing. Then I put down that way, right. I just put up, set up the text and then we'll bring it back over. 7, 8. For me, working in installation is to work in relation to a particular place. You're coming in and you're, in some senses, animating the space. And you don't know what that space or situation will do to you, and vice versa, what you will do to it. Like you try to make yourself blank so that you can just pay attention to what comes up, what it makes you think of, what it makes you feel, all of those ways that your skin as an organ and as a membrane is incredibly smart. Immediately you walk through any threshold and, you know, you smell and you feel the temperature and the light and all of those things that have an enormous influence.
This particular building, it's had 1,200 people working here at one time. It's in an area that was sort of like the company's down area, and it's about 3 months ago.
I didn't ever actually visit this building when it was in operation, but as a textile factory and house of production that was now silenced. You know, the hollowness of that, the emptiness of that was very palpable. I'm all bones today with this strength. I wanted to have one room be the room of the writer and one room be the room of the reader, and now they become ghost-like suspensions of silk organza that sit side by side. So they're identical in form. They're about 30-foot square rooms that are just suspended within the architecture.
Hey, would you carry this over to the other pipes? Okay.
There you go. And then within each of those rooms, there's a long 10-foot wooden table, and upon that will be a spinning projector.
With what Anne's doing, remember, she's not a traditional artist in the sense that it's a piece of painting or it's a piece of sculpture. This is something that people really have to reach for and have to break out of what they expect to see. And it's saying really to the people that there's more here than we saw, and there's someone else that's seeing that.
Yeah, you can help hold the projector.
So right now, this is actually the section that's going backwards in the so it's the pencils like eating the line.
Part of making one is to allow those things perhaps that are already there, but not visible to us, and to try to make them visible in a way that they're experienced. This Jeffersonian neoclassical building we inherit as a real emblem of the American democratic ideal. And so I wanted to engage that in the building. How do we deal with stains of our history? How do we take those aspects of our social history, slavery being the largest one, that we have a democratic country that was founded in days in slavery. And how do we talk about that? I thought the only way to do it perhaps was very abstractly. This stream of intensive electrocution products sifted on the wall, and it was a patch on raised plaster glass that were fixed to the walls, spelling out text and for that. And that text was edited from the homosexual resin copy. From the corner of each of the 4 rooms, there was a soundtrack within Second Inaugural Address, which was really one of healing. It was translated letter by letter into the printed copy that I live in Ohio, and I moved back after teaching for about 7 years in Santa Barbara. It was a very conscious decision to want to move and be closer to my family who live here. This is it's a kind of a real comfort to come home and to work out of that place. And after a long time, my parents also really helped with a lot of my work. You know, my mother would sometimes fly out to work on a big project, and my dad has helped on projects, and now increasingly they provide me with that kind of backup that actually allows me to do the kind of tracking that my work has needed. And I think that would be much harder for me if I didn't have all that. You can't be a mom and have a child in kindergarten and not have somebody help. Hey, Emma, do you want to come see your picture? There's an aspect of my work which is wanting to give voice, but my voice is not necessarily the voice that's here. I feel like my voice is maybe here and here, and so how do I literally make the place where song also, as well as all of the words that exit the body, actually become my eye? I devised a way of making pinhole cameras. I put the camera in my mouth and then I unblock the aperture so that when I reopen my lips, I'm actually exposing the film. You know, you're never supposed to have your mouth open in public. This is like you don't see people standing, you know. It's a vulnerable position. It's a place where it's like you relax and you let yourself be open and vulnerable. It became very interesting to register this time of standing quite still, face to face with another person, like soul to soul, and revealing something that's not, you know, the surface stuff that we usually allow out to the world. The shape of the mouth is very much the same shape as the eye, and the image becomes almost like the pupil. But so to sometimes invert the location of one sense to another part of the body, those kind of dislocations, slippages, is one way that you come to see something differently.
Look at this fire coming up in here.
Wow, look, oh, totally magic.
It's a flat sheet of water with soap on either side, and it's about a 50th of the thickness of the human hair. And when things get that thin, like oil slicks on water, they tend to reflect certain colors of light depending on their thickness. I just thought it would be interesting to try to see, and would be able to incorporate this in any of her work.
You know, Martin sort of said, I'm doing this thing, and he demonstrated it. I don't know necessarily how or when or what I would do this, but it's becoming increasingly clear to me that it's related to everything I've ever done. You know, it's the fluidity of the cloth. It's the way that you can take your hands and you can go through the membrane of it. Oh, I love this bubble coming out like this and the breath being made palpably, visually present. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I know when I'm making work that I have to, like there's a point where I can't see it, I can't see it in my head, and then, you know, there's that moment where you can see it, and you think it might be beautiful, and it's like it bites you, you know, and then you will go to all in sometimes to try to see it, in fact. But of course it's always different for something else, but.
watching these interviews or listening to an artist talk about their own work is that I can give you this quick survey of installation art, but it would take way too long to talk about the concept behind every piece. And I believe that there's definitely interesting concepts behind all of this installation artwork that I've shown you this evening, and just to hear her talk about her work and then to see how she's also using other media to express these ideas. And so to think about how I'm not sure that I know of one artist that only does installation art and only installation art. You know, it's almost like the installation art is a vehicle for the general idea that they have in their own artistic practice. I don't know, what do you think about that? Does anybody have a This wasn't supposed to be a lecture.
But Amy, I was thinking a little bit further about the comment that was made at the beginning, where the viewers needed to complete the work.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's true in all artwork, but I think the thing that's different about installation is that the viewer becomes a part of that work.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, it's always going to be this unique space and time place. Whereas if you have something that is, here's the object and then another object and then there's a meeting, maybe that object can be moved to a place and another person can meet it, but the installation I think is unique because you become a part of that artwork.
We experience it more on the level of how we experience everyday life with the sound, the smells, the touching material, spatial awareness, other people, interaction. So I think it calls on a lot of different, or a lot more of our senses when we're experiencing installation art versus the stationary object like you're talking about, Jenny.
Well, that's good to go. We're just
I think I'll hold off on showing the other video with James Terrell and just show you some of my past work and talk to you a little bit about the ideas that I've pulled from the installation art that I've studied and the characteristics that I see as being important to the work.
Amy, can I ask you one question?
Yes.
You might cover in this. When did you move from just doing two-dimensional drawing to three-dimensional? Or is that kind of always the way that you saw it and
it was in graduate school about the second week after I started. And I started just drawing in a wall with a jigsaw. And that's when the drawing as three-dimensional, as temporary, as installation started. This was my studio at CSU, and I ended up redoing all the sheetrock in the studio. That said, I have no graduate work to show you. This is a piece that I did right after I graduated when I was in the Barstow teaching residency at Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And I was teaching a 2D design course and a special topics course called Space Invaders, which was 2- and 3-dimensional installation. And I was also given a studio space and a show. So I did this work called Domestic Cyclone, where I started making these gestural drawings with wood and using materials that I just found at Home Depot. So, a lot of vinyl flooring and construction foam. And so this is where I think my visual vocabulary really started. And so in other pieces, like this piece at the soap factory, I was also using the wood and paint on the walls. And then in this piece at the Lincoln Center, before they did the renovation there, I was invited to come and rip the carpet off the walls, which was so cathartic for an artist to rip carpet off walls. That's like the worst decision ever made. And I planted grass in the gallery as well, between the ceiling tiles and transformed the space. I also did this piece as part of Art Prize in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was called Van Climb. I collaborated with a sculptor named Keith Yench, and we pulled this van into the gallery space and built a wall around it. And this piece at the Saugatuck Center for the Arts, which was the second edition of the Domestic Cyclone, where I added an inflatable made out of Tibet home wrap. As part of my studio practice and installation, I do these additional drawings that I do at the same time that I'm working on the installation. So I consider them to be conceptual drawings, even though they can be autonomous from the actual installation. So you can see that same sort of form that's present with the wood in the installation pieces, and here it's in silkscreen and drawing. And these are pieces that were alongside the other inflatable installation, and then Van Climb, where I used actual photos of the van. So going back to the domestic cyclone piece, I also incorporated shadows pretty intensely with my visual language, and really worked with the play of surface. Started to work with the wall surface. So you can see a wallpaper pattern on that back wall, and that was actually done from hand-cut contact paper, clear contact paper, so that there's a different sheen when the light is on it. Carpet is terrible for installation. It's just the worst thing, unless it's a part of your aesthetic vocabulary. So this was built on site, even though I built some of the pieces off site and brought them in. But you can see like little details where that comes around the heating register. And these are glued to the wall. These are some other drawings that went along with that work. This piece nearly killed me and a collaborative relationship, but it was great to be able to pull that van into the gallery space, build that wall around it, coat the drywall so that when you actually saw the van from the other side, it looked like it was only part of the van. It was really fun. And I made all these concrete blocks out of cardboard, so I was really transforming utilitarian materials with other found materials and just remaking those building objects. And the actual, the wall is built opposite what it normally would be built at, so it has a header at the bottom, and so it's actually self-supporting that van. That's why it's called Van Climb. There's another conceptual drawing of Van Climb. The Lincoln Center project was just a 2-week project that I did in conjunction with another artist, making some references to Joseph Beuys and basically just destroying and then finding some order out of that chaos. I don't know if you can see this, but I repeated that wallpaper pattern by scratching it out of the glue that was on the wall. Another carpeted space. But using these pre-made materials and transforming them in some way that becomes a domestic surface is something that's really interesting to me as an artist. So actually upholstering this column with a tarp and upholstery tacks sort of transform that space in the sense that I consider this to be a temporary work that is site-related, but not necessarily site-specific. Whereas, and these are some drawings that went along with that show. Whereas this is probably the most site-specific work that I've done in the sense that at the soap factory it was conceptually connected to the nature of the building. This is, the soap factory is an alternative art space, but it is also the most haunted space in the state of Minnesota. And it also used to be a sausage casing factory and a place where they would render animals for soap. So using that information, I was asked to do this installation, which is pretty large, and so I incorporated that gestural mark with the wood. But then I also created this subversive wallpaper pattern that is on the walls and then also painted on these pieces of MDF. And then the MDF is also cut to be larger pieces of that. And the wallpaper pattern is made out of intestines and animal parts. So making something gross beautiful again. And these are some drawings that I did. Some more installation shots of that piece. This is really about stage sets, and so I referenced the sort of artificial stage set by building these crude 2x4 supports behind the MDF shapes, and then also having these red velvet sort of sandbags that weighted those down. I believe that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Brief overview of my work, sorry.
Can I just say something real quick that's a sidebar?
Yes.
Because there are a number of students from front range here. Before you leave, please make sure that you take a look at Amy's installation, and if you haven't looked at D2L yet, your assignment is on there about this. So you need to understand what Amy just said, and you have to look at this wonderful installation and relate it to what's been talked about tonight. And the best thing is she's just down the hall from our classroom, so if you really want to talk with her, you're able to ask her questions.
I have a question too, just quickie. I think some of your work is very humorous, and I just was wondering if anybody else thinks that too.
Well, I think
like the van, I mean, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that I do is a play on language. Like the language that I use that associated with the work. Also the materials I think are can be humorous, especially that inflatable. That inflatable is like when it is blown up and then the fan stops and it starts to deflate. It's both obscene and hilarious. It's this gigantic object that then goes flaccid and then gets blown up again, and it's just...
We could put that out on, the, you know, on Railroad Avenue.
I didn't do that. But another guy who's installing that show has some...
Maybe what do you love about working in a full space?
I like the physicality of it. I like being able to use materials that are like building materials and building something. That act of building is really enjoyable to me. But with all of these installations, composition, color, line are all really important to me, just like they would be on a flat surface. And to be able to draw in a three-dimensional space like that is is just enough of a shift from a piece of paper to be completely new and challenging in completely different ways. And I think having that experience not just as the viewer, but as the maker and being inside that work is really important in the process of making. Well, thank you.
April, I have one question. You mentioned your domestic cyclone piece, you used only material from Home Depot. We recently renovated our house, we spent a lot of time at Home Depot. Was there a certain reason why you chose a Home Store or a Home Depot particularly?
Well, you've never been in Mount Pleasant. Like Home Depot is all there is. It was basically all I had.
So supply and demand.
So was it,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't know if there was a statement about Home Depot.
No, there wasn't a statement. Home Depot has a great return policy, so I used a lot of materials in my installations that I then return afterward. Nobody here works at Home Depot. No, but I really like those faux materials that you can get for building. So I use that vinyl tile that look like parquet flooring, and then I also love wood grain contact paper. I just think that there's something to be said about making a temporary piece of artwork with temporary materials that are fake.
That you then return.
Just full circle. Try not to lose too much money in the process. I think that's it. Great. Thank you.